Each of us four ladies married Kody. It was through our church.
All love stories ultimately turn into stories of boundaries. For over a decade, the Brown family constructed its public persona on the premise that love could be multiplied, not divided. When Sister Wives aired, Kody Brown was the embodiment of hope. A man who thought faith and justice could sustain 4 marriages. Viewers were welcomed into a utopia where harmony was promised through common belief. For years, that dream held just enough light to keep everyone walking forward. But light fades slowly before it disappears, and by the time the tell-all special arrived, the family had been living in the twilight of that dream for a long time. The scene that begins with Christine saying, "You don't get to tell me you're grieving," is more than a heated exchange between ex-spouses. It is the moment that the ideal of plural love at last succumbs to its own inconsistencies. The words fall with the force of a gavel coming down on wood. Final, unanswerable, the end of a long emotional struggle. All that follows in the special emanates from that sentence. To appreciate the power of it, you must follow the Browns to this breaking point, and why the confrontation feels both intimate and cultural. When Kody and his wives initially came on television, they embodied a very particular kind of American spirituality. Their brand of plural marriage was designed to seem contemporary: tidy homes, frank dialogue, joyful children. It was a counter to the myth of secretive polygamy. The image held for a time. With each new season, another chapter was added to a family willing to test the notion that love multiplied through obedience could be moral and functional. The camera documented the beat of everyday domestic mayhem: birthdays, meals shared, confessions in minivans. Over that beat, however, resentment began to earn interest. Christine's voice always had a tremble between devotion and weariness. Her early interviews revealed a woman attempting to believe in equality within a system built around hierarchy. When she told her that she desired romance, she wasn't merely seeking attention. She was seeking proof that her role in the system still had value. Her smile grew increasingly difficult to maintain with each passing year. The audience saw it before she could acknowledge it. The center was beginning to crumble. By the time the family moved from Las Vegas to Flagstaff, the fissures were evident. Physical space reflected emotional space. Each wife constructed her own home, her own habits, her own rationale for remaining. Kody, tenuously strung out, found himself focusing his affection on Robin, the youngest wife, whose union with him still glittered with novelty. For the others, that glint appeared as favoritism. Discussions that had finished in prayer finished ending with silence. The plural ideal that once existed limitless was now a zero-sum scenario. The pandemic amplified everything. What had been gradual drift turned into open separation. Quarantine regulations became loyalty tests. Kody's insistence on domination, dressed as concern, revealed a thread of fear. For Christine, isolation clarified what she had been in denial about for years. She wasn't merely unhappy, she was invisible. The decision to exit was more an exhale than an explosion. As she packed the boxes, she wasn't rejecting belief. She was recognizing that belief without mutuality is mere endurance. All this history bores down to the tell-all phase. Suki Krishnan takes center stage, calm but forceful, the proxy for the audience, each bride separately, bathed in soft light, bearing their own definition of truth. When Kody talks, his voice swings between rage and hurt pride. He blames, dodges, justifies. Christine's part is subdued but cutting. She listens to extracts of him stating he never loved her, and you can see the incredulity turning to determination. The emotional topography of the scene is uncluttered. She is rooted. He is revolving. Then comes the line. He tells her that he is still grieving the loss of their marriage. On the surface, it sounds like contrition. But Christine hears something else. A man trying to reinsert himself into her emotional space after publicly dismantling her dignity. Her reply, calm but absolute, draws a border. You don't get to tell me you're grieving. It is not cruelty. It is reclamation. For years, her emotions were scripted to conform to the story of spiritual oneness. Now she writes the story herself. Possession of sorrow becomes possession of self. Psychologically, the moment reverses the usual power dynamic of the show. From its inception, Kody was the storyteller. He framed things, rationalized choices, brokered conflict. The wives lived in response to his dominance. By not acknowledging his account of suffering, Christine gains narrative power. She doesn't contest facts. She makes his assumption of entitlement to construct them invalid. In communication theory, this is referred to as metacommunicative reversal, the reversal from content to context. She isn't contesting whether or not he grieves. She's asserting that his sorrow no longer includes her. It's a real-time boundary, and the audience can sense its weight. The silence afterward is almost cinematic. Suki's eyes widen slightly, as if she knows she's witnessing the emotional thesis of the entire series. Kody blinks, caught between indignation and shock. For a second, the posture of spiritual patriarch dissolves, and what remains is just a man facing the echo of his own decisions. Viewers online would later describe it as the most satisfying moment in the franchise, a single sentence that redeemed a decade of endurance. But satisfaction is never easy. Christine's disobedience also reveals how much suffering has been normalized in the family's theology. In a culture in which obedience is presented as virtue, limits appear as betrayal. Her words thus serve as both heresy. When she denies being the vessel for his regret, she also denies the religious reasoning that rendered her pain virtuous. That's why the moment is personal and political. It's the emotional departure from faith that submission is sacred. As storytelling, the confrontation serves as climax. The series opened with a question: can plural marriage survive if everyone actually loves each other equally? And closes with its answer: it can't, because equality needs symmetry of power, and polygamy tilts power unevenly by nature. The camera doesn't need to explain that. Christine's sentence does it on instinct. "You don't get to tell me you're grieving" translates to, "You no longer define me." It's the sound of a hierarchy collapsing. Behind that breakdown is years of micro-concessions. Each time a wife settled for less attention, each time someone swallowed up jealousy in the name of faith, the system required one more inch of self-erasure. Christine's rebellion is not an epiphany. It's the aggregate recoil of 1,000 silent surrenders. When she speaks at last, she is speaking on behalf of every iteration of herself that remained silent. Kody's response uncovers the weakness of power founded on emotional entitlement. He demands that he has a right to be given space to mourn, yet he fails to see that grieving without responsibility is merely self-pity. His brand of grieving keeps him in the foreground of the narrative. Christine's refusal makes him face displacement. That way, the fight is not so much about hurtful words exchanged as it is about ownership of the narrative. Whose hurt matters, whose remembrance lives on. Suki, by accident or design, is the arbiter between perception and truth. Her questioning is soft but insistent, each probing the participants toward self-discovery. When she commends Kody's moment of integrity, she also reveals just how uncommon it is. The audience can perceive what he cannot, that the wives have already reached acceptance while he is stuck on justification. People in the audience outside the studio translate the moment into their own lives. Social media threads fill with comments from people who have left controlling relationships. The line, "You don't get to tell me you're grieving," becomes a meme of liberation, quoted not just as entertainment but as emotional education. Reality television doesn't do sentences too often that stay with viewers, but this one does because it spells something profound. You can't ask for forgiveness from the person you wouldn't listen to until there was nothing left to do. The breaking point, therefore, is not yelling or revenge. It's about clarity. Christine's tone is nearly tender when she says it. She doesn't want to humiliate him. She's instructing the audience on what emotional boundaries look like when apology turns into manipulation. She admits that there is grief, but demands it has to be worked through in secret, not used to attack the person who has already recovered. That is the difference that makes closure, not repetition. For Kody, who had constructed his identity on leadership, being cut off from having the last word feels like destruction. He reacts with the language of domination, stating his right to feel, to explain, to define. But the more he talks, the smaller he gets. The imbalance of emotional maturity is stark. Christine's terseness is more true than his paragraphs. Audiences feel that the exchange is not conversation but accountability. If you slow the video, you can observe the physical choreography of that confrontation. Christine's shoulders are square. Kody leans in, waving open palms as if begging the camera to get it. When she says her line, she hardly moves. Stillness equals dominance. In body language readings, the one who dictates movement dictates meaning. By not flinching, she sets the tempo of the encounter. The camera lingers on her face for half a beat longer than normal, letting silence speak for itself. What makes this moment echo outside of fandom is its sincerity. Reality television lives on manufactured drama, but this fight is unmanufactured because it labors under the weight of actual history. 10 years of compromise boiling down to one brutal boundary. The editors don't even need to add dramatic sound effects. The nakedness is sufficient. For the first time, viewers are not seeing a family bargaining faith, they're seeing people bargaining truth. As the episode closes, Kody attempts to regain control through philosophical posturing. He talks of things learned, of moving forward, of the need for peace. But peace cannot be unilaterally decreed. The effective geometry of plural marriage is no longer cohesive. Each wife has entered a separate orbit, and his gravity no longer constrains them. The title of the show, Sister Wives, now applies to history, not the reality. Christine's strength doesn't erase her pain, it reframes it. By claiming her right to define the emotional narrative, she models what recovery looks like after years of self-negation. The line isn't simply about Kody, it's about the larger question of who controls the story of suffering. When someone who caused harm tries to narrate their own redemption through your pain, saying no is the only way to stay whole. The breaking point is at once an ending and a start. For the Browns, it is the unraveling of shared myth that bound them together. For the audience, it is a lexicon of boundaries. Viewers do not merely witness Christine, they are taught by her. She is a study in emotional autonomy. That is why the scene stays with us long after the credits are done. It isn't polygamy anymore, it's the universal act of taking back one's voice. When the studio lights go dark, no one is applauding. The discussion rambles into sidelines, but the dynamic has shifted. Everyone knows the center cannot be regained. Kody continues to discuss logistics, what might have been done differently. Christine smiles agreeably, already somewhere else in her head. You can feel as though she has passed some unseen boundary between participant and witness. She is no longer experiencing the story. She is observing it conclude. Subsequent interviews would set this moment as the actual conclusion of the series, no matter how many episodes are left. All reality television fads always come to a point where reality surpasses its form. The Browns reached that point the moment Christine declined to be scripted by anybody else's loss. Her sentence, brief and peaceful, marked a decade-long tale with the sole conclusion it deserved: self-definition. That is the breaking point, the moment a woman stops explaining and just asserts the boundary. For all those years of love sermons and unity, it turns out the most revolutionary thing was to utter one plain sentence: "You don't get to tell me." The rest is silence, and in that silence, freedom starts. When the relationships fall apart, memory is the first casualty. As soon as someone leaves, all those who remain begin reshaping the past in order for survival. For Kody Brown's wives, and him, this rewriting did not start after the split. It was integrated into the fabric of plural marriage itself. Every individual's story about the truth depended upon their position in the affection hierarchy. When Kody declared he never loved certain of his wives, he wasn't merely offending them, he was rewriting the family history to excuse the past he preferred. And when the wives fought back, they were fighting not only feeling but fact, the proof that their love, their work, their decade of devotion had ever existed. It isn't an intentional act, rarely rewriting history. It begins as self-defense. When Christine walked away, Kody's image as the successful plural husband shattered. Early seasons of the show had established him as charming and even-tempered, a man with 4 homes to manage with a sense of humor. Losing 3 wives in 2 years undermined that facade. By declaring he never loved them, he turned failure into intent. If the weddings were empty to begin with, he hadn't lost anything. He had merely finished making a difficult but correct adjustment. That narrative allowed him to remain in control in his own head. Christine listened to those same words and felt her past being denied. Every birthday, every late-night conversation, every struggle to believe in equality was being recast as fantasy. When she confronts him in the tell-all, the passion behind her measured tone results from that recognition. To her, love had not been an illusion. It had been the cornerstone of adult life. To deny it was to deny her. The line, "You don't get to tell me you're grieving," is actually part of a bigger argument. You don't get to reinterpret what we were. Reality TV creates this phenomenon bigger because the footage itself is evidence that opposes memory. The audience can rewind to hear Kody vow allegiance to each wife. They can replay touching moments and observe how subsequent interviews negate them. In most relationships, memory is intimate. With the Browns, the archive is public. The discrepancy between what was recorded and what is now asserted becomes the arena for truth. Every revelation in the tell-all seems like a bid to claim ownership of a collective documentary. This tension is felt most acutely by Mary. She was once the legal wife and spiritual matriarch of the family, and now she is redrawn in Kody's version of events as someone he remained with out of duty. When he declares that he never loved her, she hears the erasure of decades. Her reaction is weary but dignified. She doesn't dispute the facts. She just asserts that there was affection somewhere along the line, that it counted, and that retelling the story doesn't erase the pain. Her calm stands in opposition to Kody's defensiveness. Fans see how frequently he interrupts to defend himself, while the women talk in careful sentences that have the weight of consideration. The human mind has a low tolerance for cognitive dissonance. When our behavior contradicts our sense of self, we warp memory to reestablish balance. For Kody, the vision of a loving patriarch is incompatible with the picture of a man ditched by 3 wives. The simplest repair is to remake the past. If they were never really suited, if love was never mutual, then their endings aren't failures but necessities. It's an all-too-familiar psychological gesture following divorce, but in the context of religious polygamy, it also has a theological function. By reframing the narrative as fate, Kody maintains God's favor. Christine's pushback imperils that equilibrium. She will not permit dogma to gloss over abandonment. Her forthrightness reveals the distinction between faith and justification. When she tells him that she loved him and knows he once loved her, she's not being nostalgic. She's guarding the truth from being distorted into propaganda. In therapeutic terms, she's claiming narrative integrity, the right to define one's own life free from outside manipulation. That's what makes the fight so visceral. 2 individuals are battling over who gets to tell their story of marriage. The term, rewriting history, emerges time and again in the tell-all. Suki brings it up in an even-handed way, but everyone sees its bite. Janelle applies it to talk about Kody's tendency to downplay good memories. She remembers that even when he complimented Robin's loyalty, he did so by comparing it with their alleged shortcomings. Rewriting is not mere omission, it's comparison. By exalting one wife, he belittles the others, making affection a hierarchy. The wives do the same in return, redefining him as cold and dominating, which, while partially warranted, also serves their own recovery. Memory is a tool that everyone uses to survive. There is also a cultural aspect. For years, the Browns set themselves up as spokesmen for contemporary polygamy. Their public image rested on the narrative of shared love and agreement. When that picture fell apart, someone had to take the blame. If Kody confessed his own bias dismantled the equilibrium, the credibility of the movement would suffer. By insisting the older marriages weren't based on true love, he shields ego and ideology alike. The story morphs from polygamy failed to those specific relationships weren't right. It's a beautiful work of self-exoneration, masquerading as fact. In the counter-narratives of the wives, you can hear the reverberation of another battle, the battle for recognition routinely encountered by women escaping religious patriarchy. They aren't just mourning lost marriages, they're facing decades of spiritual gaslighting. Each time Kody rewrites the past, he challenges them to question their own eyesight. Christine's even-tempered insistence that he once loved her is an act of intellectual defiance. She will not allow his revision to rewrite her reality. That's why her words strike a chord with so many viewers who have fled abusive relationships. She embodies the hard work of trusting one's memory after years of invalidation. Narrative analysis-wise, the editing of the show supports this theme. Producers put new interviews alongside archival footage, at the visual level highlighting contradictions. The audience witnesses Kody declaring lifelong devotion in the early years, and hears him today deny that devotion had ever been made. The montage itself becomes a commentary on the fallibility of memory. In a meta-narrative way, the series is chronicling not only the life of one family, but the construction of truth under pressure of emotion. Faith makes it more complicated. In the religious context the Browns originally subscribed to, individual truth is sacrificed to prophetic authority. When a patriarch declares that he feels spiritually released from a wife, that declaration is authoritative. For the wives, to disagree is not emotional defiance, it's theological dissent. Reinterpretation of history thus constitutes claiming spiritual control. Kody's newer interpretation positions himself as a man led by revelation and not preference. But where faith confronts public evidence, revelation begins to resemble revisionism. In interviews beyond the program, Kody discusses pain and betrayal, portraying himself as misapprehended. His lexicon illustrates how rewriting works grammatically. He substitutes discrete memory with abstraction. We weren't compatible. Our energies didn't align. She withdrew intimacy. Each sentence erases context, transforming rich emotional history into bland logistics. Language turns into camouflage. The wives, on the other hand, speak in concrete moments, forgotten birthdays, holidays alone, interrupted conversations. Their specifics put texture back in a past he desires reduced. The conflict between abstractions and specificity is the struggle between revision and recall. There is another layer of interviews from Janelle. She puts rewriting as a coping device created out of guilt. He knows which buttons to push, she asserts, but he doesn't own up to pushing them. Her insight illustrates that rewriting is not simply about the past, but about power in the present. By getting to shape what happened, Kody continues to get to shape how others see him. Each denial becomes a try to re-establish dominance after having lost relational power. Christine's rebellion pierces this fog. She doesn't respond with venom. She just tells what happened. The paucity of her testimony is what makes it credible. She doesn't plead perfection. She owns up to her own weariness, her own willingness to remain too long. But she will not let him control the meaning of her persistence. That truth unnerves him because it doesn't want approval. It wants liberation. When someone stops debating and starts declaring, the rewriting ends. Psychologists refer to this phase as narrative closure. It is the point at which an individual structures memories into a narrative that no longer needs the other person's permission. For Christine, that closure comes in public, under the lights of the studio, before millions. She might have remained silent, but to utter what is true out loud takes private agony and makes it public wisdom. It is the reverse of rewriting. It is reauthoring. The distinction is slight but profound. Rewriting conceals. Reauthoring discloses. Mary's journey parallels this on a slower timeline. Her dignity rests in acknowledging contradiction. She knows love existed even if it died. When Kody dismisses that, she lets him speak and then calmly reminds the audience that rewriting history doesn't change what was. Her steadiness acts as a mirror, reflecting his instability. One of the most touching moments comes when she exclaims that she is happy to have achieved peace, that she does not feel bitterness anymore. It's a line that reads tiny, but is a gigantic amount of inner labor. For forgiveness without erasure is the strongest kind of acceptance. The most complex version of the story is Robin's. She is both witness and icon, the wife whose very presence catalyzed much of the family's disintegration. During her interviews, she is visibly conflicted between devotion to Kody and sympathy for the other wives. She maintains that she did not tear the family apart, affirming that she joined it with good intentions. However, even she admits the rewriting, claiming that Kody's recent pettiness is unlike the man she initially knew. In that statement resides an implied awareness that he too has changed because of the narrative that he is perpetually narrating. The more he upholds his current beloved, the more he has to devalue his former loves. Rewriting is a form of self-destruction. The audience feels this erasure. Online debates pick apart each contradiction, using his own words against him. In the process, the audience itself becomes a shared memory that refuses to be erased. The fandom itself becomes an archive of responsibility. For the first time, reality television's fixation on receipts and clips has a greater good. It preserves truth from alteration. The public record is the family's conscience. If you examine this pattern in historical perspective, the necessity of rewriting failed utopias is universal. All movements based on moral perfection will collapse under the weight of human imperfection. When it does collapse, leaders need to provide an explanation for the gap between ideal and result. Some confess that the dream was imperfect. Others claim the followers let it down. Kody elects the latter explanation. It's simpler to assume his wives were not committed than to consider that the system itself wasn't functional. This reflex isn't evil, it's survival. To consider that polygamy harmed the women he loved would destroy the significance of his adult existence. So he cuts. He reshapes the narrative so it fits again into something coherent. The tragedy is that coherence costs connection. The more he abridges, the less actual those decades are. The women, in their individual houses, reconstruct identities upon complexity, recognizing both joy and pain. Their memories live. His concretize. Seeing him on interviews, you can see the price of keeping a reduced history written all over him. Each denial necessitates another to back it up. The reworked story with time becomes a trap. Suki's role in this process is subtle but crucial. She doesn't attack. She probes. Each time she asks about the past, she invites the participants to choose between honesty and protection. When they choose protection, the audience feels the tension. When they choose honesty, the show transcends entertainment and becomes testimony. This way, the tell-all is collaborative editing, with Suki as both interviewer and moral editor, cutting away at excuses until there is only truth left. Rewriting history also has another psychological price. It isolates. If everyone in your life remembers something other than what you do, you must exclude them from your life in order to keep your version. That's what happens to Kody. By the end of the special, he and Robin are isolated, not only physically but narratively. Their common narrative remains the sole one that continues to validate his selected truth. The others transcend it just because they embrace contradiction. They are able to live with complexity. He is not. On that note, emotional flexibility is the real test of faith. As demonstrated, the turning point was when Christine asserted her independence, discloses the intellectual fallout from that act. Once one individual speaks plain truth, everyone else's version in moderation must collapse. The family's public story comes apart like a thread pulled from a densely woven rug. What is left are discrete stories tied together by hindsight. The viewer, once rooting for the Browns' togetherness, now tracks 5 convergent paths towards self-definition. The irony is that the fragmentation creates more authenticity than the initial premise ever could. By redoing history in order to hold on to power, Kody loses integrity. By holding on to history in order to regain dignity, the wives gain it. The irony is instructive on a greater level about the nature of storytelling itself. Truth is not one memory, but the aggregate of truthful viewpoints. When a single voice dominates the narrative, distortion is certain. When there are multiple voices, even disagreement sounds like integrity. The tell-all caps off this chapter of the saga in a subdued confrontation. Every participant, wittingly or unwittingly, chooses which memories to bring forward. Christine retains the love that did once exist, but not the guilt. Janelle maintains pragmatism but loses compliance. Mary retains nostalgia without expectation. Robin holds on to hope, though she appears drained from fighting for it. And Kody, still struggling with his identity, still keeps revising the story in real time. The viewers know that this rewriting will never end completely. It will simply change medium, from conversation to memory, from memory to myth. What the audience is left with is something greater than gossip. They are seeing the anatomy of denial, how the human ego defends itself by rewriting the timeline of love. In our daily lives, the same process occurs in secret in hundreds of relationships. Seeing it play out in public allows us permission to give it a name. Revising history is a grieving process, but it cannot generate healing. Only when memory is permitted to remain messy does closure exist. By the closing minutes of the special, the dichotomy between past and present is absolute. The man who used to preach eternal harmony now speaks in terms of individual peace. The women who used to share a home now share only the experience of having lived through it. The initial myth of sister wives, a family united by divine equality, has given way to a more human narrative of divergence. In that change is an odd kind of redemption. Truth, though broken, is more liberated than perfection upheld by deception. Finishes with this acknowledgement. History always will be rewritten by people who are too fearful to meet their own image. Yet the future is reserved for those who recall truthfully. The Browns' reputation is now not about polygamy. It's about being brave enough to speak the truth about what really occurred, even if the tale hurts. For Christine and the others, memory is defiance. For Kody, forgetting is protection. Between those two urges is the true story of the family's ascent and collapse, a story that, however many times it's retold, will always lead back to the point at which truth would not be cut from the narrative.